well, good morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining the training today. I think we're just going to get started. We are waiting on a couple of people, but we just have the hour, so I don't want to waste too much time. I'm Denise. I'm the support analyst for EndoPRO for VCH, PHSA, and PHC. And today we've got Munir from Provation, who is the vendor, who's going to do some training with us today on DocuScribe. So, Munir, I'll turn it over to you, and feel free to jump in with questions if you have any.
Perfect. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this early morning. I hope you're doing well and keeping warm. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the EndoPRO DocuScribe component, so the reporting component. So we'll touch on the image review, and we'll go over the DocuScribe reporting component as well. If you have any questions as I go along this, please feel free to jump in and ask away, and we'll get started here. So you're probably all very familiar with the screen that you're seeing now when you launch EndoPRO, and you get to see your little scheduler here. In this scenario, we're going to be using these two test patients, VPP test and VGH Jane as the first name. Before I get this show on the road, I just want to confirm, do we have any bronch folks on the phone?
Yeah, we have several.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start with a colon, and then we're going to work our way down to a bronch case. Okay. So in this case, just as you do at the moment, we'll start and stop the procedure to bring it to the complete state. That way we can proceed with our image review and procedure report. So to do your image review, first and foremost, once the procedure has reached the stop procedure status, you're going to right click and you're going to choose image review. That's going to drop you into this window here where you can go through your images. Some of you may already be familiar with this. All right. Now, a lot of these components can be dragged and resized based on just by dragging and dropping it based on the size that you want. So on the left-hand side, you have all your images that you took throughout your case. Okay. You'll see that on the bottom left-hand side, there's a small checkbox. Checking that box will put a check mark there, and we'll drop the image on the center of your screen, indicating that that image will be present on your procedure report. As things stand, you can only put in 8 images into your procedure report. This way it will go into Accelerate without an issue. So in this scenario, I'm going to choose to put in image 1. I'm going to put in image 2 or image 5. I'll put in image 8. I'll put in image 2. Okay, so we have our 4 images now on our on the middle of our screen, indicating that those are going to go into our procedure report, along with the fact that they have been checked. So first and foremost, if you choose to do so, you can capture your procedure times within the image review component. And to do this, you'll notice on the top of your toolbar, you have a few buttons marked as start of procedure, extent of exam, and end of procedure. So we're going to use these to mark each image. For example, we're going to mark image 2 hypothetically as our start of procedure. We're going to mark image 1 as our extent of exam. And lastly, we're going to mark our retroflexion. We're going to mark our retroflexion as our end of procedure. Just something to note, when you click on these images, you're going to see them at the bottom highlighted in a orangish color. That indicates that that is the active image. Okay. In this case, image 8 is active. As you can see, it's got that little orange piece. So when I click on any of the markers, be it annotations or procedure event markers or what have you, it will always do that to the active image. Okay. So you'll notice it's inputted a procedure time, it's inputted a cecal intubation time, and a withdrawal time. And I know that these numbers don't make much sense at this point, and that's because these are test images. But typically, in the real world, what it does is think of it as you're taking an image from your phone. It will basically take the details of that image and put it into these events. Okay. Now, again, none of this is mandatory. This is just one of those things. If you want to capture, you can do it over here, and it's somewhat automated and straightforward. Okay. Now, let's say, for example, you find that there's some inaccuracy to these times for whatever reason. So just a note, once you've inputted the times, if you're satisfied with it, you just hit the Save Times button there, and it will send those times over to your procedure report. In the event that you are not satisfied with those times, you can edit it. Just click on those times. Let's say withdrawal time we felt was inaccurate for whatever reason. You just want to click on it, put in the time that you feel serves or is accurate, and click the Save Times button. It will bring up this little dialog box asking you for a reason for that. You can give any reason, whatever is most appropriate. In this case, I'm just going to say other, and I'm just going to say not applicable. And then I am going to say OK. And at that point, it has sent this time over. Sorry, I see Naz, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't. Did you say if you say extent of exam, it then automatically puts that as fecal intubation time, and then it calculates the withdrawal time from extent of exam to end of procedure? Is that what happens?
Yeah. So to dive in a bit more, so basically, in order for these to work, you want to take a picture at the start of your procedure. So when you're inserting the scope in through the rectum, you want to take a picture at that point. You want to take another picture at the end extent of exam. So when you reach the cecum or ileocecal valve, and then you want to take a third picture when you retroflex. And those 3 images would work as your event markers.
And is there a way to modify this if, let's say, a person had a right hemicolectomy or something? So they wouldn't have a cecum, they would have an anastomosis.
Right. Yes, you can. So in that case, that would be your extent, right? So that's what you would use. Whatever is the extent that you can go, basically, that's what you would use. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Perfect. You're very welcome. And then you can state that on your report that the patient had an anastomosis. Perfect. So moving on, we will continue with our images. So once we have marked these event markers, should we choose to do so, we can then proceed to add annotations. So once again, you want to click on the active image. If you want to make it bigger, which I tend to prefer to do, is just double click on the image and it's going to become bigger there for us. You'll notice on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see all your annotation labels. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to mark this one by clicking cecum, and you'll notice it's going to drop the cecum annotation there. Now you can do whatever you want with that annotation. You can change the color if you want. You can add an arrow. You can add an oval if you want. Squares, whatever it is that you want. Okay. And let's go ahead and add another annotation on image 5. So again, we're just going to double click on it. We're going to say polyp. Now, let's say, for example, let's say the annotation labels that we have here are not sufficient and that there's something else you want to say. Simply click on the free text button. It's going to bring up this free text dialog box, at which point you can add a free text annotation as well. Okay. And there we go. It has dropped that in there for us too, and you can move and reposition it the way you see fit. Any questions on the annotations component? Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to now dive into the procedure report side of things. Alrighty, so to go to the procedure report, you simply click on the procedure report button there on your toolbar, and it's going to bring up this select a template dialog box. Now you'll notice here you got a colonoscopy template and you got a colonoscopy do not use. Always use the colonoscopy template. If you use or click on the colonoscopy do not use template, it will show up with a complete blank template. So the reason that you have the do not use template is it's just a dummy template I needed to create to enable some functionality. Okay. So when you open your template, it's going to load up and it's going to bring up your procedure report. So now on the left-hand side, on the white space, you have your procedure report. On the left side, you have all of your fields. One of the very important things I want to note here is you do not want to type on the procedure report itself. So where you have this procedure report on this white space on the right-hand side, you do not want to type in there. Furthermore, you'll notice that some content on this white page with your procedure report is highlighted in sort of a baby blue color. That denotes to database fields. Okay, so if you go ahead and type there, it will result in errors on the back end and could very well result in your information not being pullable. So let's say 5 years from today, if you come and say, hey, Munir, I want to see how many of my patients had a mass, for instance. I wouldn't be able to pull that data up if you were to type that within this space or within the highlighted blue spaces. Okay, so very important there. Furthermore, the other interesting piece is these highlighted blue fields are also the fields that will get populated with data as you go across filling them out using the field section on the left-hand side. Okay, and we'll go over that in just a moment. Now, let's say, for example, you forgot to add an image. You can do that without having to go straight back to the image review section. Just hover your mouse over the images and videos on your far right-hand side, and it'll bring up the images and videos pane. Scroll down to select an image that you wanted to add. In this case, I'm going to add image 3, hit the checkbox, and it'll drop that image in there for us. Once we're satisfied, simply moving our mouse back into the fields area will minimize the images and videos pane. Okay? Alternatively, if for any reason you decide you need to go back to the image review section, simply clicking on the image review mode on the top of your toolbar will drop you back into the review section where you can make modifications, and then click on the procedure report to return back. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have all of our fields. You'll notice that some have a green circle beside them and others have a red circle beside them. The green circle denotes fields that have already been filled out for you, while the red circle denotes fields that are not yet complete. That being said, as of now, no fields are set to mandatory. There may be some fields that may be set to mandatory in the future, and those ones will be marked with a bluish color circle. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to start with my indications. Now, the green fields that have been filled out for you was pulled from the appointment. Okay. So it comes in via the interface, was pulled in via the appointment. So let's start over with the indications. I'm going to say the patient is here for surveillance of colonic polyps. Okay. And I'll click on that. Now, let's say, for example, I'm looking for something. Let's say that this list looks a bit large and I know exactly what I want to choose over here. There's a little search box over there. Simply clicking on it and typing what you're looking for will bring up the indication you might be seeking. So in this case, let's say, for instance, I'm seeking IBD. I simply type out IBD and it'll bring up all my IBD options. Sorry, Naz, you have a question for me?
Yeah, can you put in 2 indications by any chance? Like, let's say that.
Absolutely, you can put in as many as you need to. So let's go ahead and select multiple indications. So let's say abdominal pain, generalized, and let's say rectal polyps, for instance. You'll notice under indications, it says, you'll notice on the right-hand side on our report, it's populated the data saying the patient is a 2-year-old female here for a colonoscopy due to history of colonic polyps, abdominal pain, and a history of rectal polyps. Does that answer your question, Ernest?
Yes, it does. Sorry, but in a politically correct world, what happens if it's somebody who is binary, non-binary, like not female or male?
Okay. Good question. So under patient sex, these are the options that we have, and all this comes in through the interface.
So Naz, in this regard, this is how Cerner identifies male, female, unknown, other, and undefined. That's what's set up by Cerner system. So
Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome. Any other questions, Naz, before I move on?
No.
No, and keep them coming. Keep them coming. Thank you.
Is that going to
Okay.
be modified? Because that's going to be some people, if they ask for their reports and you say this is an undifferentiated.
It would be a better question for CST.
Yeah, okay. But I think it needs to be.
And I was surprised actually that it is what it is already. I would have figured they would have changed that by now.
I think it needs changing.
I could certainly put the question, but I don't know the answer myself. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to put that question because, you know, I mean, for me, we can turn around and say, well, that's only what it accepts. And it's not just the procedure report, it's the entire system. But I can see this coming up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was expecting to add more to EndoPRO to match up, and it wasn't there. So, yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you all. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to touch on the indications piece. So now let's say I want to go to the next field. There's two ways to do that. If you click on this little next button, it will take me, or it will drop me to the next red field, so the next incomplete field, okay? In this case, which is procedure performed. So that's one way to navigate to the next field. Alternatively, you can simply click on procedure performed, and it will drop me there as well. Okay, so there's two ways to do that. Whichever way you choose is fine, whatever you find easier. Okay, let's say, for example, I am at procedure performed, but I decide that I need to add something into indications. Simply click on the indications, click on add new indication, will bring up the indication options for us to select. Okay, so moving to procedure performed, we'll say we are doing a colonoscopy surveillance. Okay, and then next. List of medications. So for list of medications, who wants to share with me their initial medication that they start with?
Yeah, I use Versed 2 milligrams and fentanyl 25 as the usual.
Okay, so Versed 2 milligrams. All right, and IV, and fentanyl. You said 25?
Correct.
Okay, there we go. So if you noticed when I was inputting this medication, that was quite a bit of clicking involved to get that across. So this is one of the ideal areas that you can utilize what is known as a field favorite. A field favorite will save components that you would use commonly so that you don't need to re-enter it all the time. So in this case, let's say, for example, this is my starting point. So I enter it like this, and you'll notice there's this little star with the add new favorite show up there. Simply clicking on it will bring up this add new favorite dialog box. Okay, it will show me everything over here for my favorite, and then I would just give it a name that means something to me. In this case, let's say V2 / maybe F25 and accept, and then it's saved. So now let's say we want to use our favorite in the next procedure, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Okay. To delete any items, you simply click on it and click on this page with an X. When you click on the page with the X, it deletes the items. Okay. So you'll notice we have this little button called favorites. As soon as I click on it, it will bring this little pop-up here with favorites in front of me, which will allow me to select what I would typically use. So it'll show me the favorites that I've saved. So in this case, we saved V2F25. So if I click on it, it will put in my data there for me. So I don't have to do it for every case. Now, in this scenario, I've seen doctors who will save, their first medication, their second, and their third like this. Some will just save one and then will increase it accordingly. So let's say, for example, as the case went on, I changed the 25 to, let's say, I don't know, let's say 35, for example. I simply click on the dosage and I click on 35 and accept, and it's changed it to 35 for me. Any questions on that?
Yeah, do you happen to also have Buscopan and diazimals? Because sometimes we use that in our diazimals, not very often, but Demerol, diazimals, and Buscopan.
Good question. So the medications that you see here on this list is what we have at the moment.
Yeah, there's no Buscopan, which a lot of us use quite routinely. I don't see it.
Sure. You know what? I can have that added for you. It's not, yeah, I can get that added for you.
Yeah.
Could you maybe send Denise an email with exactly what you need for Buscopan, and I can go ahead. And if you could do that preferably by today, just because we're going live on Monday, and I'll get that in for you.
Okay, I'll send it right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Ness. Perfect. So moving on. So we got next piece of content. So basically everyone understood how to use the favorites component, correct? Perfect. Okay, so moving on, prep details. I'm going to choose that I don't want to enter any data for that. Prep quality, I'm going to say adequate. Digital exam, I'm going to say normal rectal exam. Instrument use. So the instrument use is the scope, and this will move on automatically as per the this will come over automatically as per the scopes that are already being entered for you by the nurses, so you won't have to worry about this. Extent of exam, I'm going to say CECUM. And then we come over to our location and findings. So our location and findings is basically the meat and potatoes of your report. So in this case, I'm going to say I found a polyp. I found it, let's say, in the transverse colon. And let's say I found a few. And I'm going to say that they were approximately 3 millimeters in size, and I'm gonna say they were sessile, and I'm going to say we performed biopsy using cold forceps, and we in specimen in jar A. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and add more findings. So I'll say add new finding, and I'll say we found diverticula, and I'll say we found it in ascending colon, for example, and I'll say there was a small opening, and I will say we perform a single biopsy using forceps, and we put the sample in jar B. And then I'm going to add another new finding, and let's say the content that I want to add is not over here, or what I want to say perhaps is not over here, so I'm going to add a free text, and I'm going to say this is a free text finding. Okay, accept that. So you'll notice now it's inputted all of that data in for us. So our findings now say a few sessile polyps measuring 3 millimeters in size were found in the transverse colon. A biopsy was performed using cold forceps. Tissue samples were placed in jar A. Diverticula was found in the ascending colon. The opening was small. A biopsy was performed using cold forceps. Tissue samples were placed in jar B. And then lastly, our third finding. This is a free text finding. Okay. And please note, a lot of these fields have a free text option for us. Okay. Moving on to retroflexion, I'm going to say.
I have a question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
You know, the way we denote polyps is generally, I mean, pedunculated and sessile is an option, but you know, we generally use the Paris classification. And I'm just wondering if you have the Paris classification in there, because that's actually the, maybe it's under character. Oh, there you go. So that's Paris. So if I wanted to identify like let's say I wanted to say it was flat and depressed, which is the Paris classification. How would I say that?
So if you want to say it's both flat and depressed,
Yeah, because sometimes, or
depressed.
you can have a flat polyp that has a
There you
depressed.
go.
Okay, all right. So you just click that with the finding of the polyp.
Exactly. You click, yeah, so you click on both of them. So say, yeah, so basically you click on the both.
Okay. The only thing I don't see here, and I don't know if there is a way to add this, is, you know, sometimes we say mucus capped or not, and some people use the pit pattern. Sorry, but these are things that you know are becoming more and more standard of care in terms of descriptors of polyps.
Okay, what was these, apart from Paris classification, what were the other two again?
Well, one of them was mucus capped, so that's not that important. I mean, you know, we can put a free text mucus cap, but there is something called the pit pattern. So the pit pattern is a classification, and some people use that. I don't use it, but I can see that becoming something in the future.
Perfect. So thank you for bringing that up. So this would be one of those things. So remember, a lot of these content that you're looking at is not the final piece, okay? So what we envision here, and Denise, maybe you can speak a bit to this as well, but what we envision here is that we're going to take feedback, and then it goes over to your, I think your endoscopy council for review, at which point you guys come back to me and say, hey, Munir, these are the changes that we would like to see, or these are the updates that we would like to see. And from there, we basically go ahead and see what we can add and what we can't add from that. So what's doable and what's not, and we go ahead and configure some of this content for you. So that's kind of how we envision this looking.
One more question. Is there a way to annotate, and let's say you find 5 polyps, one of them was Paris 1P, the other one was Paris 1S. Is there a way to annotate it and say number 1, you know, 5 millimeter Paris 1P in cecum dash removed completely on block? Like, can you annotate it 1, 2, 3, or do you have to do it in a sort of a, you know, a flowing text the way you've done it? Because this way somebody has to actually read the entire report to figure out you took out 6 polyps and what their configuration was and what you did. Whereas the other way, which is what we do right now, is we just annotate it, number 1 this, number 2 this, number 3 this.
Right. So you could do what you're doing. So you would select, it's called, okay, so what you would do is you're going to select polyp, and I'll have a look at it actually. I think there might be another option over there that's not enabled. I'll have a quick glance at it. But I think you might be able to do it this way. So you're going to say single polyp. You can give it a size. Let's say, again, 3 millimeters hypothetically. And let's say this one was, let's say, a sessile under the classification, and accept. And then you can give your maneuver, whatever it is. Let's say biopsy singled, forceps, and let's say jar D, for example. And then we'll add a new one for our next polyp. And again, we'll say polyp, and we'll give it a location again. Let's say sending colon. Let's say single again. And let's say this one was 5 millimeters. And we are going to say this was a flat. And we say we put biopsy again. And
yeah, Munir, this is still showing up as a flowing text.
Okay, so this is not what you were referring.
No.
Oh, okay. So
do we have to say jar? What if we don't want to do the jar?
If you don't want, yeah, you could just hit accept and bypass it altogether.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not mandatory.
I can take that offline because this is very tedious to read. But we can.
Like you want the numbered list, basically, Munir.
Yeah, like, you know, just say number 1 this, number 2 this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, unfortunately, we can't do that on this report, but that might be something for you to give, for us to take back. What it would mean is I'd have to create a somewhat What you're talking about is more of a synoptic report, if I'm understanding correctly.
That is correct.
Okay. So I can take that back and bring something for you like that in the future.
Okay.
So let's
Can I
you
have
and
a
I
question as well? Sorry.
go ahead, Jack.
Hi. So are you counting on us to put in these poll information for data extraction? What if I just want to free text the whole thing?
If you want to free text the whole thing, you can go ahead and free text the whole thing. So when I do data extraction for anything, I can also search data based on keywords. So for
Okay.
example, let's say you're going to write 3 polyps were found in your free text. I can search, give me all data of where there was, let's say hypothetically, I don't know, let's say where there was 3 or more polyps, or where there was sessile polyps, so on and so forth. Or let's say there was mass. Whatever you type in, provided those keywords are there and that they're spelled correctly, I can search the database on a bunch of keywords as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Perfect. So now it's on the synoptic reporting. Let's tackle that together when I'm on site next week. I do have a few ideas.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving on from our location and findings over to our retroflexion. So in this case, I'm going to mark retroflex findings as, let's say, grade 1 hemorrhoids. And then I'm going to move over to our impressions. You'll notice as soon as I clicked on impressions, it auto-populated our impressions. And how that works is it takes our colon findings and it uses that to basically give us a summary of our findings automatically. However, if you click on the impressions button before you complete your location and findings, then the auto impressions will not work. So in order for the auto impressions to work, you have to complete your location and findings first, and then move over to your impressions. Any questions on that?
So Munir, I think actually this might work as the annotated part.
Yeah, so this is kind of so the impressions is like a very, it's a very summarized version of your findings.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, so moving on from impressions, moving on to, let's say if I want to add another impression. So I'm going to add one and I'm going to call it a free text. I'm going to say this is a free text impression. Go. And it will put that in there for us. Okay. Moving on to our recommendations. I'm going to say await biopsy results. I'm going to say diet. I will say maybe start high fiber diet. I'm going to say follow up with referring physician in 2 weeks. And maybe I will say, and yeah, that will be about it. So that will be my recommendations. If I want to add anything that's not here, I can simply click on free text, type it out. If I can't find what I'm looking for, or I don't want to scroll to it and I have what I want in mind, I can just type it out. So let's say I want to add continuous surveillance, for instance. I can just type out surveillance, and I have an option here. So I'll say continuous surveillance. And now I have my 4 recommendations there that I'm satisfied with. I shall move over to recall date and procedure. And I'll say colonoscopy, and I'll say repeat maybe in 3 years, and I'll say accept and accept. I don't want to enter a comment, so I'm fine with that. And you'll notice it has inputted that for me as well. And lastly, we have our referring physicians. Referring physicians, you can click on these little markers to find your referring physician. So let's say both referring physicians where their last name starts with E to H will show up here. I find this pretty I find this pretty hard to go through, but different doctors find what's easier for them. What I find a bit easier is just typing out the last name. So let's say, for example, all doctors with the name Guy in it, for instance. So I'll just type out Guy and I will hit enter, and it's going to search all last names starting with Guy, or all names with Guy in it. And then I got all the names here. I will simply click on the referring physician that I want to add and hit the select button, and that will put the referring physician in there for me. For the purpose of this, I'm not going to add any referring physician because I don't want this report to go anywhere. Okay, any questions on that? Perfect. So once that is complete, the next piece we're going to do is we're going to save our report. Just before I do that, I want to talk about the pre-populated template favorite. Sorry, Najib, I see you have a question for me.
Oh, yeah, sorry, just a quick question. For the referring doctors, is there a default as what, like, does it automatically get sent to the family doctor or something, or do you have to specify?
Good question. So if the referring doctor came in from Cerner via the interface in the treatment, then it will already populate for you. If it didn't come in, then you need to put it in there on your own.
And then the other question, maybe you said it before, I might have missed it, but you know, for some of the stuff that you like stuff in the consent or those things, which is standard, can you? I assume that in the report you can erase what you want from the report. Is that correct, or?
So things like consent, you mean?
Yeah, like let's say, for instance, if you want to add something into the consent or something like that, or you know, that's just an example.
I don't recommend that.
Okay.
Good question, but I don't recommend that. So
Okay,
I don't recommend editing the report on the right-hand side.
We see your point of view, Munir, but I agree with Dr. Ayas. You know, sometimes consent is obtained by, you know, a telephone interpreter giving you interpretation. I mean, we document that on our hard written consent, but you know, if you're going to be formal about it, I certainly document that, you know, the daughter was present for translation, or there was a telephone interpreter, or consent was not obtained because it was an emergency procedure. So I can see Dr. Ayas's point of view.
Okay. And how often that, so there are ways we can address some of this if necessary. One of the things we could do, and this is again one of the things we'd need to touch on, or one of those additions we can do down the road, is I can add another field over here called consent, or maybe consent comments, with a free text option where you can go ahead and state stuff or some of that stuff. So I could add another field called consent comments, and if there's anything you want to comment on in regard to consent, you can go ahead and do that.
Okay, well, I guess it's more of a general comment about if there's certain parts, like let's say consent or description of procedure, if that's not exactly what you did for a one-off procedure or something, can you, before the report's finalized, can you erase that section or delete it or those things?
No, you don't. I don't recommend editing the report on the right-hand side in any way.
Oh, no, what I'm saying is I don't recommend it, but if that's what you have to do, is it possible to do it before you send the report out?
Sorry, what was that?
Whether you recommend it or not, what I'm wondering about is it possible to change those parts that aren't in the blue? Like, can you just erase parts of it or something?
Yes. Okay. So I guess the non-recommended answer is anything that's blue you can modify if you absolutely have to.
Okay.
But anything that's blue you do not want to touch at all. Absolutely. That's not even a recommended answer. That's a flat no. But the other stuff, so let's say, for example, consent, if we wanted to say consent was not obtained due to
So yeah, the short answer is you could add to the white space. It's just depending on what you're adding, we won't be able to data mine it.
Exactly.
But you can erase the stuff too, right? So if you go back up, you can erase after and/or surgical intervention or something if you want.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And same thing, you know, that thing that came up with the sex and stuff as well. Like technically, you can just erase that part and put in what you want, right?
So which thing? Sorry.
Well, where you say the patient is a 2-year-old female, if you wanted to say patient is a 2-year-old binary, you know, and I don't know, like identifies as female, again, biological male or whatever, you could put that in as free text, right?
Yeah, but again, so you need to be very, very careful how you do this, because even doing something like, okay, let's say we've taken out this consent. So now you see we have this empty white space over here,
Okay.
right? So even
Okay.
playing around with these white spaces starts to affect those blue fields. So you'll notice that it's not even letting me, it's becoming very painful. And I mean, I'm going to be very honest with you. If you're good with computers and stuff like that, you might be able to get away with it. But I have seen, doctors play around with this in the past where they'll mistakenly wipe out the whole report, for example, or it will start to have funny characters and therefore will not go over to center, or all the data they inputted will suddenly disappear. So again, you know what, if you want to modify a few things here and there, that's fine. But if you want to modify the complete appearance of the report itself, then we need to take this back and see, can we make a new template that meets the verbiage that you're hoping to accomplish?
Okay. No, I'm just thinking more like if there's one-offs where, it's
Yeah, if
these
it's a
things.
one-off or once in a blue moon kind of thing, and it's not you're not making exuberant changes, then I think it should be okay.
Okay.
Is there a general comments or additional comments data field?
There is not, at least not a field on its own. There are additional comments associated with each particular field, but not a comment field by itself. But again, not at this point is my answer. So it's not something we cannot do in the future. So a lot of these, and this is wonderful feedback. So a lot of these stuff that you guys are seeing and thinking of and suggesting would need to come through Denise and the endoscopy group, that, hey, you know what, we've used EndoPRO for X amount of time. These are some of the changes we'd like to see.
So I just wanted to go back to the editing again on the blue space. I know that we do have a concern with particularly in gender, but you see how female in this case is blue. These are things that link back to Cerner. So if you do impact them, it may not accept. We could run into problems where it's not accepting the report, and then we're trying to figure out why it's not taking it. So just be careful if you are editing the white space, that you definitely don't edit the blue, just because there's direct linkage with it. In the interest of time, though, unfortunately, we haven't really got to the bronchoscopy report, but if we could show a favorites, because the favorites will definitely, this looks like a lot and a lot of clicking, a lot of work, but once we set up a basic template, you can set your favorites. So if you typically will have a similar report, we only change the odd field, this is how we'll do it next, and then it makes it faster, so you're not clicking 100 items at a time.
Perfect. So, thank you. So moving on to the template favorite component. So as most of you may know, is if you have a common procedure, let's take a normal colonoscopy, for example. Most of the time, 9 out of the 10 data points that you would input for, let's say, a normal colonoscopy case is going to be the same. So in scenarios like that, you can create a pre-populated template where a lot of the data points are already there for you, and you just need to input that particular patient-specific data. To do this, we're going to assume that this is one such template. Okay, and to do that, we're going to mark it. We're going to click on this button called pre-populated templates. So just to keep everyone on the same or aware, there's two types of favorites. There's a field favorite, which is what we did with the medications earlier, and there is a template favorite. The difference between the two is a field favorite is only to do with one field, while a pre-populated template is a favorite for multiple fields. Okay, it's basically for the whole report. Okay, so in this case, you'll notice that we have all of these data points in here for us. Let's say, for example, I don't want some of this data to be saved as part of my favorite. So basically, I don't want any of the indications to be as part of my favorite. So I'm going to uncheck them, and then I'm going to give my favorite a name. So let's call it For my case, I'm going to call this, let's say, train session. Okay, and I'm going to accept that. And that saved my favorite there for me. Okay, so that's said and done, and we're going to revisit that in just a minute, or I'm going to show you how to open that favorite in just a minute. So now that our procedure report is completed, we're going to hit the save button. When we hit the save button, it's going to bring about this little dialog box. Before I do this, I know, Naz, you like to give your patients a copy of your of the images, at least while I was there. Therefore, I suspect you might like to give them a copy of the report too. If that's the case, instead of the save button, you would click on the print button. This will bring about the print dialog box and the e-signature box. Once that is done, it will send the report to the printer as well. Okay, so moving on, the e-sign box, when this comes up, you will enter your username along with your password and click on the save button. Now, please note, once you e-sign a report, it becomes final. You cannot come back and edit the report. The only way you can come back and edit the report is via an addendum. So if for any reason you feel that you need to revisit the report because you need to input some data that was not available to you at the time or whatever it might be, you want to save it as a draft. Any questions on that?
So just to clarify, your login here is your network login. And on the handout that I sent via the invite, you'll also know that we have tap and go sort of enabled all over the hospital now. You may have to use EndoPRO from the Launchpad bar at the top of the monitor and tap in with your ID in order for it to log into EndoPRO as you. Otherwise, it may pick up the generic login that's enabled on most of the PCs. But your logon here is, in fact, your network ID.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Denise. So moving on, I am now going to proceed with signing my report. Okay, once I sign it, it's going to now drop me back into the scheduler. Okay. There we go. So it has now dropped me back into the scheduler and our report is completed. Now, let's say, for example, I want to add an addendum to this report. I simply right-click and select Procedure Report, and it's going to drop me into the Procedure Report pane. Okay, once it does this, I have my Procedure Report over here. Now, to do the addendum, I have two options. I can click on Edit Document, or I can click on Addendum. If I click on Edit Document, it will give me an error saying the document selected for editing has already been signed, and addendum will be created instead. So I click OK, it will create and open up an addendum for me. And here I can basically input details on my addendum. So I'll say maybe correction of inaccurate information, and I'll say this is a test addendum. Okay. Once I'm satisfied with the information in my addendum, I'm going to hit on save, and I am going to e-sign my addendum. There we go, and now it will drop me back into the procedure report. So now, if we want to have a look at our procedure report with the addendum, we right-click and select procedure report, and we shall see our report right here. And you'll see it was e-signed by Pentax admin. And then as I scroll down, I will see my addendum on a new page there, and I'll see that it was also e-signed by me at such and such time and such date. Okay, any questions on that? Perfect. Okay, so let's move over to see how we can access our template favorite. So I'm just going to make us another quick appointment here. Okay, so once we have our appointment to use our template, we simply click, go through the normal workflow that we would ordinarily. So we click on image review, we complete everything we would for our image review. In this case, I'll just select the images 1, 2, and 3. I'm not going to input any annotation because in the interest of time. And then I'm going to click on procedure report. and it's going to bring up this dialog to select a template. Now you'll notice under the template favorites, we have template favorite 2, and now we have train session 3, which, if you may recall, was the one that we just saved. So I simply click on train session 3 and I click open, and it's going to now open my template, or my template with all the data saved in it. And there we have it. So that is our pre-populated template with the fields that we wanted corrected for us. Okay, and we can go ahead and edit it the way we see fit. So let's say I thought that, you know what, in this case, yeah, but you know what, this patient did not have diverticula. So I simply click on diverticula and hit delete. So that's basically the entire workflow that you will be doing for your EndoPRO reporting. Does anyone have any questions?